And it gives me huge pleasure to introduce to you Dervilla Mitchell. Dervilla, I don't know when I met you, a long time ago now. I think probably Terminal 5 Heathrow, or maybe before, but it certainly goes back a bit. Deputy Chair of the Arab Group. I'm not going to give you a long, illustrious introduction about her because you can read about it on your apps. But I am going to ask her to come to the stage and tell us about what it is we see in plain sight.
Or not.
Or not. Dervilla, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and it is great on a Friday afternoon to see so many people here. I hope I'm going to give you a little bit of food for thought. I'm going to be a little bit pessimistic at some stages, but ultimately I'm an optimistic person about engineers, engineering, and our future. And I am coming to just the 40-year mark or thereabouts in my career. And this, preparing and thinking about this keynote has given me a chance to reflect. So this is quite a personal reflection on these three topics: engineering, engineers, and ethics. And I should say I'm IABSE Ethics, Global Ethics Director, so that's why it's a topic close to my heart. So in reflecting upon our profession, my experience is that we tend to be a bit reticent, and we often allow our work to speak for us. I believe that we could be much more visible, given that we have the skills and the attributes as problem solvers. We are very well positioned to understand everything to do with advancing technology, and we are the people who can find the solutions that are going to balance the needs of mankind and nature. What holds us back? What holds us back? So, questions I would ask us, is, can we innovate and adapt at pace? Can we act with high integrity that enables us to be respected by the general public? And are we, as individuals and a profession, prepared to be at the forefront and be the leaders in a new age of engineering? And in that new age of engineering, we are facing a world in emergency. And that brings about a great deal of uncertainty, which might hinder our acting. But let's think about engineering first. And I would say engineering is everywhere. I'll just have to find a spot here. We use engineering in our daily lives, in the places we live, in the places we learn, schools, universities, hospitals, in the transport we use. And engineering creates the everyday objects that we hold so dear, our phones, our kettles, etc. And sometimes the engineering we do is much less visible. So I think everyone understands that water is so important and life-giving essential. But how does that get to our taps and into our homes and into our offices? We often don't think about that, nor do we think about how electricity gets to our homes. Well, we might in this audience, but let me say I'm speaking on behalf of the general public here. So what's less, these things that we rely upon every day, the public do not really understand the planning, the design, the construction that goes into making these essentials available. And then advances in robotics, transport, or even the exploration of space is even more carried out behind closed doors. I really like the fact, the visibility of the James Webb Telescope and the programs that have been on about that, because that has really made evident what engineers do, how they take risks, and how they go about doing something as amazing as that. But let's go back. I'm going to go backwards and forwards a few times, so I'm going back. So when I joined the profession, this was very much what it was about. The art of men directing the great sources of power in nature for the use and convenience of man. And it took me quite a few years to discover that there were female role models. This is the wonderful Emily Roebling, who was responsible for delivering the Bluckern Bridge. And I see a number of people nodding in the audience. But she was not introduced to me as a young lady. And so therefore I didn't know anything about her. However, I am the daughter of an architect, And my father would say things like, "Look at this by Nervy." And I also babysat for a family who were architect couple, and they had worked in Chicago, and they knew Faisler Khan. And so they perhaps are the sort of people who opened my eyes to something that was more modern and less looking back to the 19th century. So if I think about all the eras of engineering, and forgive my very broad history, this is quite in contrast to some of the lectures I've listened to today, which have been quite precise. This is very broad. So eras of engineering. You know, in ancient times, engineering was about, necessity being the mother of invention. And these were the tools that enabled mankind to do more than they could just individually, physically do. And from these little tools, they were able to create ancient monuments in ancient time. So these individuals or teams or groups left behind them a legacy. And sometimes we know who created these, but quite often we wonder, how did they actually build these? How did they deliver these? And why are they here today? So the engineering is recognizable, even if the engineers, craftsmen, workers, not much is known about them or their history. And then we move into the sort of medieval era, and I say the era of craftsmen. And I think this is, absolutely fascinating time, because here, can you imagine how big these structures were compared to everything else that an individual experienced in their life? These were monsters. These were huge. These were awe-inspiring. And when I went to Fountains Abbey a few years ago and saw this column, I thought, I don't think I could design anything as slender and as wonderful as that. And so I admire the work of the craftsmen at that time. So there's Fountains Abbey. Salisbury Cathedral has recently unveiled all its restoration and renovation, so it's onward for another 1,000 years. And recently I went to Zaragoza, and so this is the Leaning Tower people don't know so much about. So the Torre Nueva was started leaning as soon as it was built. And it was left standing leaning from 1500 to nearly 1900, when the council decided it was too dangerous and they took it down. But at the same time as that was being taken down, here was Mr. Eiffel building his tower in Paris. And just think of the contrast between those two things. So it was an era of change. But I think the important thing about these projects that I'm showing here now, the Eiffel Tower and the Pompidou Centre, is how, and I'm a buildings person, how our buildings, but our bridges, how they create an important sense of place, and how they can make a city attractive, livable, particularly with your bridges, usable. And so therefore, I think we have to think just beyond the object itself. And I think that's important in today's world. So that's all the sort of eras of engineering, very brief history condensed. So I decided that I would then go to Mr. Google and figure out who are the famous engineers in the world. And the first thing that surprised me, these are the top 12 of one website, which I quite liked. But what surprised me was who was there from today. Who is our recognized people today? And I don't think Leslie Groves would have met this if we hadn't met this list, unless we'd all watched Oppenheimer recently and were more aware of his role in the Manhattan Project. The only engineer of today that comes up regularly is Elon Musk. So I think there's something about our visibility. And then I looked at this list and I began to think, yes, Stevenson, Watt, who else is, they delivered a rail industry. So perhaps that's why they're known, and that's why Grenville Dodge is known, delivering the Transcontinental Railway. Then there's the others, all the cars and engine people, Diesel, Benz, Daimler. They're all known and recognized names today, not perhaps as individuals, but for what they produced. There's Alfred Nobel, dynamite. But what's he known for today? The Nobel Prize. So we can be known for something different. And Leslie Groves, as I say. And then the two big contrasts in this group is Brunel, who is so well known, particularly here in the UK. And I say this to an international audience, but Brunel is the man. And Nikola Tesla, who is much cited today, but in his time, he was not perhaps as well known as he is today. So you can be well known and not well known, and you can do good work. There's not a woman here, I do note that. So anyway, I think these people were known because they produced a product, an object, a thing that was valued and appreciated. But back to me. So, what engineering was I exposed to in Dublin? And I did not know that this station in Donnybrook with its vaulted roofs, or the curves of the Bussores, which is a central bus station in Dublin, I did not know these were Arab projects, and these are the two projects that enabled Ove to start his practice in Ireland at the time. But I think it did give me a sight that structural engineering could be quite interesting, and you could produce these sort of interesting sort of buildings. So these were in my sight. And then the early work that I did was very, very modest. So here on the left, Trinity College Dublin, some of you may have visited. I was there refurbishing buildings, learning about old structures, looking in ancient textbooks, trying to understand how those structures worked. And I think that that is probably much more relevant today than it has been in the intervening period during my career. And I did produce some new buildings on an existing campus. But then I went to Boston. And the only thing about Boston was how quickly I could produce a structure. I had 6 weeks from beginning of design to completing design, and I had to have finished my work. And nobody was interested in the environment, in nature, in connectivity to the street, creating a sense of place. It was just design another building as fast as you can. I learned a lot. But coming back to the UK, then I learned something about, how to create places for people to work. And the two buildings on the right are East Sussex, they're county council, they're public projects, so modest in how they look. And the ones on the left are places for people to play and enjoy themselves. So I think from this, and I've heard this coming out in the talks I've listened to, is all clients are looking for something for themselves. They're looking for something special. They're looking for something different. And perhaps that creates work for us, but it doesn't always enable us to do the most sustainable thing that is possible. And the first time I then ended up doing a project in the public eye was this project in Westminster Portcullis House. And so not the bridge, sorry, the building behind. But your projects are often projects in the public eye, and this was one as well. And I learned how difficult it is to do those. But also I point this out because it was a very important time in our industry. We introduced email, we introduced document sharing systems, we went electronic, and it completely changed the way we were working. So this is early 90s. So I think a lot had changed then. And then rapidly on, I did 3 airports. And I'd like to highlight from those is that, again, every client wanted something different. And even though these are very similar in scale, very similar in throughput in terms of an airport, everyone had to be different. So I think that in the industry, we're missing the opportunity of standardization of components and standardization of designs, even if we wrap them in something that's different. And maybe there's things to learn from the car industry there. I have to stop for a second on Heathrow Terminal 5 because so much was learnt on that project and lost. And I heard in one of the earlier talks about people repeating things that were done 20 years ago. This is early 2000. We had a full digital model of all disciplines at the time. We worked collaboratively. We had automated clash detection. We trialed things before we built them. And there was a real focus on delivery. And it built also a very strong community of friends and colleagues who still know and enjoy working together. So I think there's things that could be learned from there for our industry for today. But how do we revive things? It's often hard. But looking through these projects and a bit of history, but particularly my period of my career, I have seen these particular changes. So this is for the younger people, particularly. We've gone from manual, literally man and his pencil and pen, to machine and model. We've gone from paper to these complex 3D models. We've gone from unidiscipline to multidiscipline. We've gone from pure outputs, as I described in my Boston experience, to outcomes. And this is a school I did pro bono, is really looking at educational needs and designing the school to meet the educational needs. And today we're adopting lots of data and technology and visualizations to help us in our design work so we can experience a project before it's built. This particular example is people standing on the Euston platform for High Speed 2 running up the country, and you can sit in the carriage and you can experience the movement as you go on your journey from London to Birmingham. So I think this is fabulous sort of innovations which we should be using. And I'm going to give you a moment of respite here, if I can. This is another example of experience. I hope there's some musicians in the room. But today, we can go into the experience lab and we can not only experience the shape and feel of a particular concert hall, but you can also hear how the music will sound in that configuration. So what else? So this is... And you can walk around the theatre and imagine the different sounds and the different, how you will look at the orchestra or the performance from different perspectives. So this is really helping put the people who are going to use the building in mind and help them understand in advance. But also besides those sort of innovations, we have seen, and I see here today, the changing face of our industry. In Europe, we're 60-40 men and women, and we've 29% of women in global leadership. But I love the formality of them on the Sydney Opera House site with their ties to the less formal settings of today. And I'm also glad to say that, you know, we have plenty of women role models. And I'm particularly delighted this year that we have the president of the Institution of Structural Engineers and the president of the ICE, who are both women. And that our institutions, and this maybe comes following on from some of this morning's discussion about ethics, is our institutions are generally working to engineer a better world, to improve our world through engineering, or to shape the world. And I think that's a fabulous focus for all our work. But coming to the meat of my talk, or the second half of my talk, I have commented that are we as engineers in engineering sufficiently visible to be impactful? And I think the matter of ethics is insufficiently discussed in the construction industry. There have, in the last year, been really well-publicized examples of collusion among contractors in the demolition industry, and fines of tens of thousands have been handed out. But if you look here, you can see the things that are above the wave, above, you know, conflict of interest is there all the time. Fraud, corruption, it happens no matter how clean we think our organizations or our supply chain is. Bribery is there, modern slavery is there, hard to deal with. Poor behavior. Can you honestly say that in your organizations you treat everyone fairly and equally and you deal with all the issues that might arise, promotions, salaries, bullying, harassment? Collusion, I've mentioned. Money laundering, I'll do that. Sanctions are an increasingly important part of our work today. Is understanding, are we working with sanctioned clients? Or is there anyone in our supply chain who we cannot deal with anymore? Cartels are another topic. So I think coming up, supply chain transparency is going to be vital for all of our organizations. ESG and reporting on that has become important. In general, there will be much greater scrutiny of everything we do going forward, and that's going to take time and money and effort and time away from design. I don't know how many people know of Transparency International, but it runs a review every year of, 180 countries. So it looks at It's a perception survey, which is around corruption in 180 countries. And the 2023 survey just came out in January. And of the 180 countries measured, the corruption levels in the last 12 years, 34 countries have significantly worsened. This is the environment in which we're working. Countries with strong rules of law and democracy tend to perform better, but significant declines are even seen in high-ranking democracies. And this is a detail of it. These are the top performing countries from Denmark down to Luxembourg. Well done if you're in that group. But the UK, I'm choosing that here because I can talk about it. You can see that every point is declining in the last number of years. And we think everything is quite straightforward here. So the trajectory is downward. Is this something you were aware of? And are you considering it in your business decisions every day? So I'm saying that much of what I talked about with my iceberg site is in plain sight. It's happening all around you. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to just go through a series of press cuttings. I think this may be recorded, so I'm not going to say any company names. I'm going to leave you to look closely at the slides. So first of all, people who are in the public eye. And if you do something in the public eye, it is likely to result in somebody having to resign, as we see on the right. And also that damages an organisation, the perception of an organisation they were unaware of the issue and did not deal with it. But also consultants in the broadest sense have also been heavily in the press. And just yesterday, the one on the bottom right got a £25 million fine because the people in their organisation in the Netherlands cheated on their ethics training and shared outcomes. So you don't do your training properly, 25 million fine, and the boss of that organisation got a significant fine and is not allowed to practice for many, many years. So these are real cases, and you can see some of the monies, they're huge. Bottom left, that's lots of millions, lots and lots of millions. Then moving closer to home, the construction industry, I talked about the collusion and the bid rigging. So 8 demolition firms admitted to rigging the bids here in the UK. And I say tens of millions of pounds in fines. It's perhaps not surprising to see that property development is there as one of the other headlines. London property empire bought extraordinary complex money laundering operation. So again, this is there for you to read in the press. The report on the right is by one of the big consultants, and I think that was interesting because it is a little bit out of date now, 2014, but 49% of organisations surveyed reported increased economic crime. Asset misappropriation was the largest of that at 75%, but procurement fraud and accounting fraud was around 40% in those that were prepared to report it. And 70% of most crime comes about from insiders. And the vast majority of that is the most senior people in any organisation, and it drops away the more junior people who are there. Engineering and the construction sector has the highest rate of bribery and corruption. And I think as things become more economically tight and people move into different markets, they'll be dealing with things that are less well understood, and therefore they're more exposed to risk. This morning, the Royal Academy of Engineering report was mentioned, its guidelines in 2010, and it was around accuracy and rigour, honesty, integrity, respect for the law, and responsible leadership. And I think the question asked this morning, and I would ask you all again this afternoon, is that good enough today? And my answer is, I do not think it's good enough today anymore with the complex range of topics that we're dealing with. And household names are not immune. Here's another set of headlines. Thwarting competition, that one you've probably read about. The second one is an employee running an immigration scam that causes damage to the people who didn't spot it. A wind farm overcharging a national body. and finally, a well-known name fined 1.25 billion to settle tax evasion. So again, these are all easily read about in the paper. And I think the thing you should be thinking about is, how do you protect your personal and corporate reputation? That's the outcome. That's the thing you're trying to achieve. And you'll be glad to see that the Serious Fraud Office here in the UK are hard at work. And you can look at their website and you can see even further examples of these sort of things. And I think I would say we would not want any of us appear on their pages here. So what are the steps we need to take? I think we need to take training of our staff really seriously to raise awareness. And that raising awareness enables them to deal with issues when they arise. But it's not just the training or the processes that are sufficient. I think it's about engendering a culture where people behave with integrity. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought on ethical issues and maybe increased your awareness. But I wanted to then just finish with, in our current climate emergency, how do we move into the age of the engineer and how do we become preeminent in dealing with these issues? So I've said earlier that, when we consider ourselves in the roles we play, I think it's really important that we have a strong reputation and that we are widely trusted, particularly by the public. That will enable us to have the influence which we would want to have. So questions I asked at the beginning, can we create a new era of engineers? I believe so. Who will address the challenges our planet and society face? We will. And we will also, through doing that, attract very much a future generation of enthusiastic young people who want to be part of this profession. And how might we do that? I think we've got to continue to research and innovate and adapt at pace. And that means valuing research, but also valuing and investing in innovation. But the question to you earlier was, are you prepared to be at the forefront? Are you prepared to be visible and to stand up? And I think that's a much harder nut to crack because I think it sort of runs slightly against our grain. But things we can do is make sure our work is understood and appreciated. That means talking about our engineering more. Ian, you were saying you had to speak in the TV last week and it ate up your time. But that made people much more aware of the issues around bridges. So how often are we called and asked to do that and go, I don't want to do it. You've got to do it. We've got to build an attractive and rewarding profession where we play a role in creating the type of environment where we will balance the needs of mankind and nature. Nature is rising up the agenda, and that is so important to consider those more broad aspects. We also need to embrace data and technology. There is going back, as I talked about T5, and I heard in one of the earlier presentations, using innovation from before. But we must also really embrace the technologies and data of today. I think it's absolutely essential that we remain collaborative. And I wouldn't mind touching base with the other consultants this morning in the ethics section about how do we do some of those things addressing climate change together rather than separately. I think we should see ourselves as stewards of the planet and not engineers always, or engineers as stewards of this planet. And perhaps we also need to be much braver if we are going to create this new age of engineering. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought and you'll go away and next time we meet, I will see more and more engineers emerging in the press, in the television, explaining all our wonderful work to the public. So good luck and enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dervilla. Certainly food for thought. And really good to finish with that thought that you just touched on there about transparency and collaboration. We've had quite a lot of discussion in these last few days about how important it is to share our knowledge, to open up, allow others to understand what we're doing, and not to hold on to things. Suddenly, and all of a sudden, people are having to rush away. Was it something I said? But no, thank you so much, Dervilla. We don't have time, as with the keynotes, to have any discussion. But perhaps if anybody wants to try and capture Dervilla for a few minutes afterwards. But thank you once again, and please give another round of applause.